Resident Evil 3 Remake. Hello everyone, welcome to the Apocalyst review of the Resident Evil 3 Remake, released in April of 2020 for PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC. I prefer to call it the Resident Evil 3 Remake. This is because it is of course a remake of the original Resident Evil 3 video game that was first released in September of 1999 for the original PlayStation, but came out a couple of months later in the United States and was developed by Capcom. Capcom is a great company that has developed many other fantastic franchises, such as Mega Man, Street Fighter, Devil May Cry, Dino Crisis, and Monster Hunter. What perfect timing as far as this game's release goes. This game, and the whole series for that matter, revolve around a virus outbreak, or for some of the later games, parasites or mold that get out of hand and cause a pandemic. Right now, as of the date of this game's release and this recording, we are in the middle of a pandemic of our own caused by a virus called the novel coronavirus, or COVID-19. Wuhan, China was sadly the first place to experience the outbreak and go on complete lockdown, followed shortly after by most of the rest of the world. Sure, it's not turning people into zombie scum, yet at least. But it is causing some deaths, spreading panic, and shutting down our lives as we practice social distancing and are forced to avoid regular activities such as going to movies, the gym, or eating in at restaurants, among others. All so-called non-essential business has been closed, and most people who are able to work from home. So while we're not seeing a complete breakdown of society, we are getting a tiny taste of what an outbreak can do. It makes the story as I experience the remake now feel a lot closer to home and way more understandable than the story felt when I played through the original. While the original was intense and designed well enough to be believable, deep down it still felt completely far-fetched, not quite so outlandish to think of it now. Also, our prayers and thoughts go out to anyone affected by our real-life outbreak. Resident Evil 3's Raccoon City is going through a zombie apocalypse. We in the real world are going through the corona apocalypse. That is now. Going back to when I was a kid, though, I was first introduced to the franchise in some ways by accident. I want you all to imagine the golden age of Nintendo for a moment. This is what I would retrospectively define as starting the moment the original Nintendo was released in North America in 1985, definitively ending whatever was left of the Atari era, and lasting until the N64 came out in June of 1996 and caused the sun to set on the time of the SNES, effectively ending the 8 and 16-bit eras for the console market. At this time, despite competition from Sega, they were in many ways supreme in the video game industry. Coming off of this high, I had to have a Nintendo. I really didn't even consider the PlayStation at that time and moved right on to the N64. It was during the time of the N64 that Nintendo faltered in some ways, with developers abandoning Nintendo in droves, oftentimes due to the limitations of the cartridge-based format Nintendo chose to stick with. This left Nintendo with long dry spells between big releases, and an overall library that was lacking, especially when it came to one of my favorite types of games, RPGs. Then along comes the Christmas of what I believe was 1999. I wasn't even out of high school back then. It was pretty rare for my parents to get me a game, but my grandma on my dad's side would usually get me one for Christmas, and on rare occasions would give me one for my birthday. So we're talking, with a few rare exceptions, that I got a couple of games at most per year, and much like Indiana Jones in The Last Crusade, I needed to choose wisely. With a bad choice, Indiana Jones was risking sentencing himself to a gruesome death via face melting. For me, I was risking Temple of Dooming myself to a 6 to 12 months worth of boredom, stuck with a new game I didn't want to play. There were very few games I was interested in that year, as from what I recall, options were very limited. And with no big-name games I was familiar with that I didn't already have, no matter what I chose, I was risking a year of boredom on an unknown title. I turned to Game Informer, which was my only source of official game reviews at the time, and rolled the dice. The one that happened to catch my attention the most was Resident Evil 2. Still have the box right up there. It was my first experience with the franchise, and boy oh boy, was it a good choice. The thriller horror aspects were unlike anything I'd ever seen before, and served to be the gateway drug of the video game world and beyond for me. This is the first game that I played through with one of my sisters. Prior to this, I thought she was scared of everything. But she proved me wrong, and playing video games together was something we enjoyed from that point on. Not only was it a good bonding experience, number one, but two, it also literally helped my sister overcome her fears and gain lifelong confidence that can easily be traced back to this. Resident Evil 2? Two great benefits? Coincidence? I think not. We call that fate, my friends. The original RE2 also opened me up not only to the franchise, but a love of anything with a survival horror theme or that involved the undead. It is indirectly what led to my love of zombie films like George Romero's classic Night of the Living Dead, shows like The Walking Dead, and other games like The Last of Us. What a real treat that game was. The N64's lackluster library was a blessing in disguise that truly broadened my horizons. Resident Evil is one of my favorite franchises, and because of the influence it's had on me, is near and dear to my heart. As the Lord of the Rings Bilbo Baggins would say, it is precious to me. I go out of my way to not only buy them day one, but I also download demos day one to scratch that undead itch with a new title as soon as possible. Most games I wait to hit the bargain bin or go on sale, in large part because I don't have the time to play most games I would like when they are new anyways. But with Resident Evil, things are different. I make time for it the way I do with the gym or eating delicious Little Caesars pizza. Yeah, the gym followed by pizza. Yeah, it just gotta happen, my friends. I love getting the pre-order bonuses for new releases as well. Pre-order bonuses. Yes. Oh, yes. Let's look real quick at the Resident Evils that made their debut on the PS4 or Xbox One and compare it to this one. I'm talking regular pre-order bonuses here, not the GameStop exclusive collector's editions, which, if you've ever looked into getting one of those, is pretty pricey. And we'll start with Resident Evil 7. For that, you got a survival pack that included herbs, a first aid med, strong first aid med, and a lucky coin, plus an early unlock of the Madhouse mode. A deluxe edition that included a season pass was also available. I really enjoyed this one. Then for Resident Evil 2, the remake of the game that got this whole thing started for me, you got a couple of Samurai Edge handguns, and the deluxe edition also came with some extra costumes and an extra soundtrack swap. I think it all became available in the store later, but it was still a pretty nice touch day one. Then the announcement for the Resident Evil 3 remake comes along, and holy crap was I excited. One of the things I was most excited about was seeing what the pre-order bonuses would be. Would there be an original soundtrack swap? What would the deluxe edition include? Well, here's where the disappointment begins. There was going to be no deluxe edition. That blew my mind. Why not? Resident Evil 2 and 7 that came before it did, so why not this one? Fear crept into my heart that it was too rushed and this might be the first sign that they had effed it up. F for fudge, of course. And the pre-order bonus was just an original costume unlock for Jill and Carlos? That was pretty weak sauce in my opinion, especially considering Jill's are both pretty similar, and Carlos has just changed his hair. Not to mention Jill's original costume unlock has her wearing shorts, where in the original Resident Evil 3 she was wearing a skirt. I'm not sure if they F or fudged that up as well, or if they just thought shorts were more appropriate than a skirt. How about giving us something useful like we got in Resident Evil 7 or Resident Evil 2, like healing items or special guns? How about if you're going to give me a costume swap, you make it something I care about, like making Nemesis look like himself? That would have made it all worth it for me. So now, the full game is out, and I have it in hand. What is the verdict on the final product? I was both incredibly impressed on one hand and slightly let down on the other. The part that impressed me is how vibrant and alive, or should I say, undead, Raccoon City and the whole game feels. The controls are tight, and with the added dodge feature are even better than they were in the remake of Resident Evil 2. And knives don't break! This is one of the rare things I really didn't enjoy about the Resident Evil 2 remake. I get why they did it, but I still didn't like it. I mean, will a combat knife break in real life after stabbing something a mere couple of times? It's made for freaking war. Of course it wouldn't. You could unlock an infinite knife, or what I personally like to call a normal knife, but you have to do multiple playthroughs to do it because some of the Mr. Raccoons you have to find and break are exclusive to certain campaigns. Anyways, that is fixed here and is a huge plus for me. Everything looks and feels great. I'll get into what let me down in just a second, but that will require us getting into spoilers. So, this is where I'm going to get into spoilers, so spoiler alert, you've been warned. In the midst of enjoying this sweet remake, as I just alluded to, the first twinge of disappointment set in with there being no deluxe version with any extra in-game content available for the hardcore fans among us, aside from 2 weak costumes. The main things that let me down are mainly regarding Nemesis. For one thing, I loved how in the original I could clearly hear him say, "Stars," and make other terrifying grunts and monsterly snarls, or hear his giant stomping footsteps that filled me with terror every time he was close enough for me to hear him. He's still one pissed-off, lab-grown mutant, but I don't feel like the sounds that made such an impression on me from the original are there. I usually can't even hear them, but when I do hear him say, "stars," it's kind of muffled and weird, and quite honestly, it's possible I'm looking for it so hard and want to hear it so badly that I'm imagining it. I think there are times he did say it, but if I had not played through the original, I honestly don't think I'd even notice it. So it wasn't enough that they changed his iconic look completely. They had to take away him clearly saying "stars" too? What were they thinking? Listen, I have to take a moment to be honest here. That particular component gets the Matthew Bruschi seal of disapproval. Nemesis not clearly saying "stars" is completely unacceptable horse s. So to me, the encounters, while they could be pretty cool and neat in a different way, just don't pack the same punch that the original did. Also, I really hate that they changed his iconic look so much. His new look actually works well, as he looks like one mugged up dude, kind of like the Umbrella Labs version of Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. On one hand, this new model is probably scarier, due in part to the fact that we've all been so desensitized to his old look. But honestly, how scary is it going to be, especially after you first play through? On the other hand, I wish they gave us the option to switch over to his old look, or as I prefer to say, the look of his true self. They've only forgotten. I've got to ask again, wouldn't having that option have been a great pre-order bonus? Heck, I'd pay extra money online on the store to be able to unlock that. To be fair and give credit where it's due, to me the Nemesis here works really well for what he's supposed to do, but I can't help but think of him as a different tyrant that is not the Nemesis I knew from the original. For all intents and purposes, to me at least, he is a different person, and I enjoy it a little better when I think of it that way. They even took his name out of the title, as the original is Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, while this is just Resident Evil 3, which could be an indication of the downplayed or at least altered role he was intended to play. Marketing is all about brand name recognition, so changing his iconic look to something completely different seems like a bad move from a product placement standpoint. I mean, as an easy to understand example, imagine if they completely changed how Bowser in the Mario series looked in a new game. Small changes over time are fine, but if it was a completely revamped and altered Bowser in a new game to the point he was unrecognizable, it'd essentially be a reimagining to the point he'd, for all intents and purposes, be a new character and ruin years of having his look cemented in the minds of fans. To me, with this remake, if they insisted on using a reimagined design, it would have made more sense if they had two Nemesis-like tyrants this go around. I mean, why not? They took so much creative license with everything else, so that would seem reasonable to me. Then you could have had one that looked like a classic Nemesis with better graphics, and one that looks like this newer iteration. Everyone would be happy that way. Double your tyrants, double your fear factor, double your pleasure with double mint gum. There are things I like about Neo Nemesis, aka Nemi. Yeah, Nemi, kind of like how in the Star Wars prequels, episodes 1 through 3, they called Anakin Skywalker Eni. Pretty cool nicknames befitting their badassery, huh? At first I thought the Nemesis would just be a beefed up version of Mr. Excellent from Resident Evil 2, and he pretty much is. But man, an encounter with him is no joke. He will kick the horse piss out of you faster than a zombie from Plants vs. Zombies will eat a brain. I actually found the boss battles with him, where you were trapped on a rooftop with him wielding a flamethrower, for example, or certainly the final boss fight that was a ridiculously easy piece of cake, to be much easier than open encounters because in the boss battle, he seemed slower and was more restrained and predictable. When you run into him in downtown Raccoon City, for instance, and he is free roaming, he is fast and he is tough as undead poop. In boss battle mode, he is far more predictable and much slower. While I do miss the stop-screen spur-of-the-moment choices you would get to make in the original about whether to run, hide, or fight Nemesis that are completely absent here in the remake, I do love how Nemesis still drops item cases in some encounters. Yeah, that's right, and I found 4 of them, 2 of which give you upgrades for your handgun. The other 2 gave me shotgun shells and fire rounds. I'm pretty pleased that they still included Nemesis drops like this from the original. In the later morph stages, starting with 2 and up of Nemi, he kind of looked like the Queen Alien from the legendary movie Aliens, which is one of the best movies ever made, by the way. The enemies in this game are pretty fun to kill, as the forces of evil always are. Slaying zombie scam is always a good time, but there are other types of enemies in this game as well. At one point, you are trying to turn power back on in the electric grid. The switches in the power station are all covered in a giant organic mess, infested with huge bugs that will attempt to put a tube down your throat to inject larvae inside you like a freaking facehugger from Aliens, which will then burst from your belly like a xenomorph. Again, just like the Alien movies, which seems to have had a little bit of influence here in some of the design decisions. At one point, I walked in and was attacked by two of them right at the entrance. I whipped out my shotgun and blasted one, while the other went back around a corner immediately to the left and began scurrying away. I saw an electrical generator at the end of the hallway, whipped out my pistol, and blasted it right as a retreating bug was in range, and zapped it to Zombie Kingdom Come. Yeah. It was such a sweet and satisfying encounter that ended in a small but glorious victory. When you go into the sewers, you encounter giant creatures that appear to be frog-like amphibians or something like that when you first see them. But when you look closer, they look almost like a defeathered raw chicken on their back half. Mutants living in the sewers. Reminds me of turtles who once did the same. Anyways, the sewer mutants here seem to have what resembled chicken wings for arms, and their legs look like that of a recently plucked rooster. These beasts will eat your ace whole, but it is very satisfying to fire blast the lab-grown mutants into their final slumber with a nice, soothing flame round. Sleep, hideous man-eating mutants. Sleep forever. I like the addition of hidden items, and in this game, you have Mr. Charlie dolls. In case you were curious, I found and destroyed all of Mr. Charlie dolls hidden in this Undead 3 remake, and did so in both the demo and the main game. They're similar to the Mr. Raccoon dolls hidden in the Resident Evil 2 remake, or the football player bobbleheads called Mr. Everywhere in Resident Evil 7. The reward in the main game is apparently just an in-game achievement with points you can use to purchase in-game items, which is okay. I like it when I do something and a specific item is unlocked, but in a roundabout way it does help you get special items. And I suppose, in another way, you could argue that it's better because it gives you the flexibility to buy whatever you want, rather than being tied to a specific item. I've got to say, one thing that really stands out to me is the look of this game. Just as showcased by the demo, it looks great. This runs on the Resident Evil engine, just as Resident Evil 7 and the Resident Evil 2 remake before it did. Somehow it manages to look even better than either one of them did. I mean, wow, it's just breathtaking to look at. Remember at the end of the original Resident Evil 3 when Nemesis is in his final death throes and Jill says, "You want stars? I'll give you stars," as she blasts his mutated ace goodbye? Well, that infamous line makes a comeback in this game, though probably not in a place you might expect. But still, it's there. Controls. The controls are greatly improved in this by one main factor. There's a dodge ability in this game for Jill and a counterattack ability for Carlos. After playing games later in the series like Resident Evil 4, where you could roundhouse kick Ganados in the face like a black belt champion, or punching enemies right in the face with the Arnold Schwarzenegger-like strength of Chris Redfield in Resident Evil 5, not to mention the sweet moves Sheva had in that same game. Resident Evil 2 left the characters feeling underpowered in some ways, so it's a nice change to be able to do this and not feel so helpless, while still needing a lot of skill as it must be executed at the perfect time to work. Here's an example of a time it came in handy for me. When playing as Carlos and going through the police station, I encountered a couple of tough as balls, wrecking balls that is, lickers. The first one I stumbled into when I turned a corner at the end of a long hallway. His biohazardous ace jumped and attempted to ambush our lush-haired hero with a swipe to the face. I quickly countered with Carlos, who, like the second coming of Resident Evil 5 and 6's Chris Redfield, punches the lick-loving mucus out of him. With a single punch, the licker flies back against the wall in front of us on the opposite side of the room and bounces out of sight into an area off to the left by where some vending machines are. I go to the safety deposit room, gather all the goodies, and when I come out, the licker is seemingly nowhere to be seen. I even start running to tempt him out, but nothing. Is it possible Carlos killed him with a single counterattack? I wish I'd recorded it because it was a glorious victory that didn't cost me a single round of ammo. So, what's something else that story tells you? That's right. It's Carlos that is in the RPD this time, and not Jill as it is in the original. So Nemesis never actually enters the RPD in this version of the game, at least not that the player ever sees. So all the theories about where the holes in the wall of the RPD came from, such as the shower room of on the second floor, were not caused by Nemesis. There are a variety of locations you'll get to visit during your time in Raccoon City. You start off in an apartment complex where you're attacked by Nemesis right off the bat, which did surprise me. I didn't expect him to show up so soon. In the first couple of scenes, he's all covered in a black material, which may have once been a body bag with patches of caution tape stuck to it that's wrapped tightly around every part of him, including his head. He sort of reminds me of what the comic book version of Doomsday, the supervillain who kills Superman, looked like when he first appears. And also, just like Doomsday, as you encounter and fight Nemesis, more of his covering breaks off, and you can see his grotesque face. You then get to see a subway station after being rescued from Nemesis by an Umbrella mercenary named Carlos, and then get to pay downtown Raccoon City a visit. Raccoon City is vibrant and full of lights and visuals that are really eye-catching. It's a place I'd love to go get donuts or go hunting for action figures. You get to see a power station, the dark underbelly of Raccoon City, aka the sewers, and sprawling bridges with statues adoring the well-decorated walkways along a river. At that spot, I actually stopped to catch my breath and enjoy the scenic beauty. That was another place I wish I could visit in real life. There's also a creepy overrun hospital, Umbrella Labs, and you even get to return to the RPD from Resident Evil Dia. Regarding the story, it's worth seeing if you like the original or the series in general, and is going to be fairly close to what you'd expect if you know the story from the original RE3. The settings all look great, and the characters are well done and believable. The voice acting was pretty solid. Carlos is awesome in this game. He's a really likable character. While he still has some lines such as, "I wouldn't leave you in a cold, cruel, Carlos-less world," he's far more refined than he was in the original, where he seemed more like a line-dropping playboy. I'm really big on in-game collectibles and replayability. This game has both. The records list is robust enough to be rewarding and challenging, but not so idiotically insane that they can't be done. Some give you trophies that will be permanently attached to your profile. Some check off in-game records that give you points to spend on the store once you beat the game, and some do both. I really like it when games have points or money to buy usable in-game items, and here the store I just alluded to is unlocked after beating the game, which is awesome. It increases replayability and makes points or money that you earn fun to collect. The stat-boosting coins, first introduced in Resident Evil 7, are back, baby, and available for purchase in the store. It's just too bad there's no shopkeeper like Resident Evil 4 had, which is, I think, the best implementation of this that the series has done yet. But the store here is still a very nice touch. Of course, I won't rest until I acquire every one of the items for sale and get a check by every record. On games like this, I love to go back and get the trophies and highest ranks on the toughest difficulties the game has to offer. With Resident Evil 7, I got the Platinum Trophy, and not only did I get the Platinum Trophy on Resident Evil 2's Remake, but I actually got an S+ rank for both Leon and Claire on Hardcore mode to unlock an infinite Gatling gun and rocket launcher. Yeah, I'm hardcore like that, especially if unlockable items are involved. What, do you think I sit around watching movies all day? This is Resident Evil. It's not a game, or a joke. I've got to get all unlockables, and beat these undead beasts on the hardest difficulties they have to offer, with the highest ranks available. Capcom shortly thereafter issued an all rewards in-game unlock that would have done the same thing, but no amount of money can earn you an S+ rank. You've got to earn those bad boys yourself. Getting those S+ ranks is probably the second hardest video game feat I've ever done, second only to beating the first Ninja Gaiden on the NES when I was a kid. No emulators, no save points, just me in the game and knowing the system had to be turned off before bed. Again, that's the hardest video game feat I've ever accomplished. Too bad I don't have a trophy to show for it. Anyways, while Resident Evil 3 does have a ranking system, to my knowledge, S is the highest you can get here, so the S+ rank available in the original is not an option to earn here. I'm not sure why they left it out, but I guess the upside is that it's one less incredibly difficult thing in this I'll have to worry about doing. Speaking of no S+ rank being included, we need to mention things that were left out of this from the original. I don't want to get into every small detail because, let's just say clearly right now, this is in some ways not only a remake, but is more akin to a reimagining. For one, the Mercenaries mode is no more. I guess our intention was for Resident Evil Resistance, which came bundled with this, to take its place. I'm not going to get into Resistance right now, but I will say that I think this game loses something for not having a Mercenaries mode. I already lamented previously this not having a deluxe edition, so why couldn't adding the Mercenaries have been a post-launch update that was part of, or even all of, a season pass? I think it's because Capcom wanted to get this out there as quickly as possible, make a quick buck, and then move on, as they are already talking about a couple of other games in the series that are currently in development. Also, there are a couple of areas that you see in the original that you don't get in this one, such as the Clock Tower, which is mentioned as there is a Clock Tower monument you interact with, and even a file/pamphlet you must collect for the bookworm record talking about it. Not to mention a boss fight right at its doorsteps. So it's kind of strange that it was in the original, and many things point to it, but you don't get to go inside of it. It's almost like they planned to put it in, and then decided they didn't have the time to implement it but left some of the assets referencing it. I also remember a park where you fought a giant worm that I didn't see here. They also cut out the scene from the original where mercenaries seem to have fought and died defeating tyrants. It was a scene near the end of the game where you see a couple of Mr. X looking tyrants that were dead, and the place is strewn with the bodies of Umbrella mercenaries that seemingly died fighting them. That would have been great to see in this game, but no such scene exists in the remake. That really goes back to 2 points. One being that the game is pretty short, so it's a real shame they didn't make the most of every morsel of source material. And two, my original fear is that this was rushed. I think not only was the game rushed to the point that details longtime fans like myself would have really appreciated were left out, but I think they spent valuable time and precious resources that could have been better used elsewhere as they rushed towards their arbitrary deadline instead of producing Resistance, a game nobody nowhere said they were really hoping to see in an RE3 remake. Again, I don't want to talk a lot about Resistance right now, as I'll save that for later time, but it is included with the game, and I can't help but think that if they really had to choose, putting that time into making more out of the main game and either skipping out on Resistance or giving themselves more time so it could have all been done, Resistance, Mercenaries, the worm fight, other scenes that were left out, etc., would have been a better choice and made a better long-term product. I haven't talked to a single person that made their decision to buy or not buy this game based on the inclusion of Resistance. One last thing I want to mention that disappoints me in this game is the fact that you can't buy a Magnum or shotgun with infinite ammo at the store you unlock. All you get is the ones you pick up in the game, and whatever ammo you can scrounge for them is all you can shoot. You pick up the Magnum pretty late in the game. I mean, wouldn't that be awesome to have it available from the beginning? Why couldn't they make all weapons available for purchase and have an option to pay extra to unlock unlimited ammo for them? Or better yet, just have an infinite ammo item you can put in your inventory just like Resident Evil 7 had. The shop is really symbolic of all my issues with this game. It's infinitely better having it there than not, but there is so much more that could have been done with it. I celebrate its existence, but lament with tears from my eyes and mucus from my nose, all the ways it could have been so much more. This game is truly on the edge of greatness, so close, but chokes at critical points and just can't quite make it past the finish line. Now, all this being said, I don't want my criticisms to be mistaken. I think it's perfectly legitimate to point out flaws or shortcomings in something while simultaneously saying you love it. The two can exist side by side. And quite frankly, I'm probably more critical of the things I really love than things that aren't so special to me. It's like if you have kids. You may discipline for their mistakes, but you love them dearly no matter what. And you don't care as much about what other kids are doing. In this case, I outlined flaws or ways it could have been even better, but I still loved everything it's got. And I would say even more than I expected, to be quite honest. For another example, some people asked in my Terminator Dark Fate review how I had so many criticisms, yet still said I enjoyed it. That is a prime example of what I'm talking about. I didn't like the direction they took the story or some creative choices they made, but I still enjoyed many of the good aspects under the grotesque shell of disappointment. Life's not black and white most of the time, and sometimes you even come to like things for its flaws, not just in spite of them. Ask anyone who's ever enjoyed a so bad it's good kind of film or B-horror movies. Now, in conclusion, I would recommend this for anyone interested in one or more of the 4 following things. 1. Reliving Resident Evil 3 in a modern package that is overall a huge improvement over the original. 2. Anyone who loves Resident Evil in general. 3. Anyone who loves action-infused survival horror. And 4. Anyone who just likes slaying zombie scam. I'll give it 8.25 out of 10. This gets the Matthew Brewski seal of adrenaline-inducing zombie-slaying awesomeness. I want so badly to give it a better score, so bad it almost hurts. But with all the omissions and less than ideal changes, it's just not possible. Listen, I don't make up these scores or any of this Kaizen. I just report it like it is, whether I like it or not. While it may have some shortcomings, it just looks so good and is still a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it and honestly, highly recommend it to anyone at all interested. Games like this don't come out very often. It is a fairly short game, taking around 5 to 7 hours or so for a first playthrough. It is going to be whatever you put into it after that for unlockables, trophies, and doing records. So savor it while it lasts, my friends. This is the Apocalyst review of Resident Evil 3, the 2020 remake. Thanks for watching.